Okay, my name is Clarence Arthur Kennedy Jr. I was born in Asheville, North Carolina, January 6th, 1942. Approximately 3 years old, my parents moved to Evanston, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, Illinois. I started off in public school, first year in public school, but my mother wanted me to go to a Catholic school. So transferred from a public school to a Catholic school. When I went from the public to a Catholic school, I had to repeat the grade, the previous grade. So, in other words, I finished first grade in a public school, and it's supposed to go to the second grade in a Catholic school, but I had to repeat the first grade. That's the way the system worked. Spent 8 years at St. Athanasius Grammar School, 3 years at St. George High School. My grandfather had died, so I went to North Carolina to stay with my grandmother. From there I went to Stevens Lee High School. And then after that graduation, I went into the service in the United States Army. Yeah, they did have football in grammar school, 7th and 8th grade. Played football in 7th and 8th grade.
And so,
And 4 years I played. 3 years at St. George. First year freshman, second year junior varsity, third year varsity, and then at Stevens Lee I played first string, halfback. That was interesting because every time you scored a touchdown, the school there gave you a ham. Oh, getting back to the grammar school, it was an all-white grammar school and an all-white high school. In grammar school, there were 3 other African Americans or black African American in the entire school. At high school, there were 4. My freshman year, I was the first African American to win the Most Valuable Player Award. And my mother threw it away. Yeah. I transferred to Stevens Lee High School in Asheville, North Carolina. And as a running back, for every time I scored a touchdown, I was given a ham. Or whoever scored a touchdown, they got a ham. 1 touchdown, 1 ham, 2 touchdowns, 2 hams. Then I enlisted in the military, United States Army. Spent 18 weeks at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. They asked for volunteers to go to Washington, D.C., and I volunteered, and the outfit that I was in was Presidential Honor Guard, Washington, D.C., 3rd Infantry. Which was a prestigious outfit. They had 4 platoons. First platoon was Marching Platoon. Those guys were 6 feet and above. Second platoon was Casket Bearers, which I was in. Third platoon was Firing Party, and the 4th platoon was Tomb Guards. When I was there was a lot of vacant spots in the cemetery. and I don't remember how many people, funerals I attended. Yeah, quite a few, quite a few. The smallest was 3 people, and the largest was 107, which was a general officer. There's a certain way that you fold the flag, and when you presented it to the family, there could not be any red showing, which is a sign of blood, and 4 stars had to be across the top. That was a perfect fold. While I was there, not only did do a lot of ceremonial events, like Armed Forces full honor arrival when the president came in, landed at Andrews Air Force Base. Had a full honor arrival there. There were different events that we attended. I was also in the United States Army drill team. There was a person that came in from California, liked it so much, he invited us to go out to the West Coast. The first stop was San Francisco. The next stop was Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles, and San Diego. And we flew back. There was a military show called The Big Picture. It depicted a lot of events that happened in the Second World War, land, sea, and air. They wanted the outfit that I was in to have a 30-second segment in there. What we did, we went to Fort McNair, which was right across the Potomac River, and to Washington, D.C. We were there for 2 days. They were practicing filming. They had to get it just right. Most of the time we were just standing around. We had to march, and they had a camera on rails that would go, that we had to march between. Like I said, it took 2 days for a 30-second segment on The Big Picture. Also, in the drill team, we had a program where there was no verbal commands. We had white slings, white spats, white pistol belt, white shirt. And all our movements for 30 seconds were done with a black light, so all you could see was white. That was sharp. It was, we enjoyed that. We practiced that 3-4 hours a day, 3-4 times a week, depending on our schedule. It was very exciting, very exciting. The reason I joined the military is I was no longer able to take care of my grandmother. She needed specialized help, and I was not able to do that, so I enlisted in the military. She was getting old. She was in her 70s, and I just could not take care of her. I didn't have the means nor the knowledge to take care of her. And since I was by myself, I enlisted in the service. The closest I came to a very important person was President Kennedy when he did his he walked by us to, observe the troops. And that was as close as I was able to get to a person of his stature. Like I stated earlier, my parents wanted me to go to parochial school, Catholic school. Growing up in that time frame, I was really unaware of prejudice. I never knew it. Uh, the grammar school and high school that I went to was all Caucasian. I never knew segregation until I went into the military. The outfit I was in, there were Mississippi National Guards, there were people from Alabama, but I didn't realize that I was different because of my environment, the people that I was around and that I associated with. I was told once I got into the military about segregation, what I could say, what I could not say, what I could do, what I could not do, where I could go, where I could not go. It was difficult for me because I had never been in that environment, and I really did not know what to do. I just did what I was told when I was told. And that basically was my only dealing with segregation. During the summer months when I was in grammar school and high school, I would go to North Carolina to visit my grandmother and grandfather, who at the time was still alive. My grandmother was a homemaker. She stayed at home, she didn't work. My grandfather worked on Southern Railroad as a porter for 53 years. They retired him, and I remember one summer I was there. He would sit on the porch, and when he heard a train whistle, he would look at his watch and say what number train that was, where it was going, where it came from. I think within 6 months after they retired him, he died, because he had nothing to do. He'd just sit on the porch in his rocking chair. Okay. My grandfather, my father's father, was named Charles Kennedy, and his mother was Ella Kennedy. On my mother's side, her father was named Monroe, and her mother was Henrietta Jones. They were Joneses. My grandmother on my father's side did not work that I know of. My grandfather was a porter on Southern Railroad for 52 years. My grandfather on my mother's side, if I'm not mistaken, was a dean of a college or university. My grandmother on my mother's mother did not graduate from grammar school. She went as far, from what I understand, up to 7th or 8th grade. My grandparents on my mother's side, they worked on a farm. My mother was catered to because she was an only child. Whatever she wanted, she got. Both mother and father went to college. think they were 2 or 3 years in college at Johnson C. Smith in North Carolina. That's about all that I can remember of them. My father was in the military. He and his uncle were in the military in the Second World War in Europe. I'm not sure what his position was. I think he was an infantryman. I know he was he was a sergeant. I'm not sure if it was a staff sergeant or a sergeant major, but I know he was a sergeant. I'm not sure of what my uncle, what he did when he was in the military. I know they went across on the Queen Mary when the war started. When my father came back, we lived in Evanston at the time, and my uncle, he lived in New York City. My mother was a very, very smart and intelligent person. She went to work for the government. I'm not sure if it was in the IRS or what position in the government she was. She worked when she was in Chicago. But she was very well respected. She was very educated. Mother's name was Willie Mae Kennedy when she was married. When my parents divorced, she went back to Willie Mae Jones. Like I said, she had a lot of important positions. When she left government work, she worked for a department store, an exclusive women's department store. She was the first African American salesperson at that store. Again, like I stated, she was highly educated, very well spoken, very neat, very well dressed. When my parents separated, I can't speak of where my father went or what he did, but I know he remarried and had 3 other children. Charles, I just remember them by their nickname, Chuck, Skip, and Chip. Can we cut it?
Yeah, without a doubt.
I have no idea why my parents separated. I know I was in grammar school at the time. Like I said, my father moved to Chicago where he met his second wife. I know they had 3 children. My mother, as far as I know, worked in that department store. And when I was in high school, I went to work for this restaurant called Coolidge Cupboard. I started off as a busboy and ended up being a waiter. It was a nice restaurant. Dealt with a lot of college kids that were from Northwestern University. Somewhere in that time frame, my mother started drinking. And I did not know why. I just know she would come home very intoxicated. Uh, the money that I was making in tips, she would steal from me. She, I don't know how it happened or why it happened. At that point in time, I loved airplanes. I remember I made an airplane, and she came home one day, and I did not have the house cleaned like she expected it to, and that she took that airplane and broke it. And I was so hurt and angry. I said, I'm gonna move to Chicago and live with my father. And she said, I don't care, go. So whatever clothes I had, I moved to Chicago. I lived with my father for a year. And during that time frame, I had no idea of the money I had to get to school. I had to take a bus from where we live to the subway, from the subway to the city limits of Chicago and Evanston. Then I took a bus to the school and followed this routine for a year. There was no real connection with my father, even though I lived there. All I remember is he was the manager of a car dealership. We used to watch Wednesday night fights and Friday night fights. But as far as us spending time together, I have no idea. I just do not remember. A lot of things I blocked out because they were too painful. I remember, I think it was a year, I remember calling my grandmother saying, please come get me, because I could not take it anymore. As far as interacting with my 3 stepbrothers, I do not remember. Again, that had to be a point in my life where I just blocked it out. My grandmother came to get me, and I lived with her for a long time. In that time frame before I moved to Chicago to live with my father, I lived in 11 different houses. 2 of the 11, one was I lived with my mother before I moved to Chicago, and the other one was with my grandmother for the rest of the time. The other 9 houses, I can go there right now and pick out every one. But why I was there, I have no idea. My father had 3 other siblings, 2 girls and a brother. The 2 girls, from what I was told, they died at a young age, a year apart. As far as my uncle is concerned, I don't remember too much about him, but I know he taught me how to play bridge. He taught me how to drive in New York City, and he was an excellent pianist. He could not read a note, but if he listened to a song several times, he could play that song. I never knew his middle name, but his first name was Homer. Homer Kennedy. Like I said, I don't remember what his middle name is, or was. Met Carol. She was a very interesting person. Met her when I was in the military, stationed in Washington, D.C. I'm can't remember exactly when, the time frame. I know I met her in Washington, but I just cannot remember where. I don't know if it was at a party. I don't drink, I never have, so it couldn't have been at a bar. But I know she was a special person to me. She used to pick me up on base. We'd go to DC, spent time together, and she'd bring me back to the base at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, just in time for reveille. I don't remember exactly when it was, but I know it was before I got out of the service. I asked her to marry me. And we got married in uniform. Well, I was in uniform. We lived with her mother, and I was able to get housing allowance, which meant extra money. Because when I first went in the Army, my gross pay was $78 a month. And by being married, living off post, I got an extra, I think it was $20, something like $20, $25. So at that point in time, I would make it over $100 a month. When I got out of the service, because my mother and grandmother lived in Chicago, we took slumber car train from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. And I guess it was 10 months after we got married, Robert was born. We got our first apartment was, I think it was Reba Place. I don't remember the address, but I know it was Reba Place. I think it was the second floor. It was a nice apartment, and my grandmother used to work for Zenith Radio Corporation's vice president, and she got me the job working at Zenith Corporation in quality control. And I worked there for, oh my gosh, how many years did I work there? Three or 4 years I worked there. And certain events arose, and Carol and I separated. I was given the opportunity to go to Massachusetts to work for one of Zenith Corporation supplier, product supplier. I think 2 years after that, she came to Massachusetts. We lived together, and Michael was born shortly after that. And again, things happened. Carol came back to Washington to stay with her mother, and I stayed in Massachusetts. This was, I think I was there, moved there in 1966, 67. I think we separated in either 68, late 68, and I started working for, before I started working for Peter Pan, I worked for Sears and Roebuck as a TV repairman. And I got bored with being inside, so I applied for this bus company, Peter Pan, and I was with them from 69 to 2003. While working at Peter Pan, after Carol had gone back to Washington to stay with her mother and raise Robert and Michael, I started working at Peter Pan, and 2 years later I met Denise. Last name was Denoncourt, or the French version is Denoncourt. I was a driver, and she got a job as a ticket agent. We dated for a couple of years. Got married April 8th, 1972. 74, Sean was born. 78, Stacy was born. When we got married, a friend of mine that I had met while I was at Peter Pan was selling his house, and he invited me over to his house, and I said I loved it. So I wish we could have it. I wish I could own it. Come to find out, a few months later, I ended up buying his house. It's a beautiful ranch, oversized garage, fireplace. It was very well put together. It had a steel carrying beam, which is unheard of nowadays, but in those days it was part of house building. The subfloor was on a 45-degree angle, which I found out from Denise's father, who was a contractor. A subfloor on a 45-degree angle is much sturdier than one that's on a 90-degree angle. It was a beautiful house, 3 bedrooms, bath and a half. The property was 100-foot frontage, and I think it was 130 feet deep. The house was situated in the middle of the property, so we had equal amount in the front yard as we did in the backyard. It was the largest ranch on that side of the street, which was a dead-end street. The house on the left had a single-car garage and a breezeway. Our house had an oversized garage, a family room, and the house on the right had a 2-car garage, no breezeway. the basement had, well, I think it was 13 inches of poured concrete. It was very, very well put together. Lived there from 1972 until 1994, 1995, 1994. After 20 plus years of marriage, Denise and I separated. I still worked for Peter Pan, and in the meantime, after a while, she left Peter Pan and went to work for American Airlines, which I think she still does. During that time frame, I used to do a lot of traveling, charter work, and I had an opportunity to move to Washington, D.C., again to work for Peter Pan, because they had just opened up a terminal here in D.C. Hobbies. Love football. Used to eat, sleep, and drink football. On Sundays, I would get a 2-pound bag of shelled peanuts and a can of fruit punch. Sit on my TV, sit on my chair, put newspaper on my tray, and watch the football game all day long. That was my passion. And for hobbies, I loved airplanes. I used to get plastic planes and put them together and pretend like I was flying them. A friend of mine who worked at Peter Pan was a pilot, just for pleasure, not for the Air Force, just for pleasure. Talked me into getting my license. And my instructor was a retired Air Force colonel. He was an instructor pilot when he was in the Air Force. He flew P-51 Mustang, which was my favorite propeller fighter plane. Clean lines, laminar flow wing, very, very little parasitic drag. He said at cruise power, at altitude, you can do a complete loop without adding power and gain a couple hundred feet in altitude. It was had that much power. Still living in Virginia. I met a very unique, outstanding person. Her name is Tina. She's born in the Philippines, and she worked for a bus company that I used to work part-time for. While I was still working at Peter Pan full-time, I worked for this company part-time because I needed to get out of debt. Her brother, Danny, was one of the co-owners of New World Tours. And we got to talking a lot, and he said, why don't you come to the Philippines? Why don't you come to the Philippines? I said, sure, when are you going to invite me? Finally, after 3 years, 2015, I had my first opportunity to go to the Philippines. I had been to Canada, I had been to Mexico, but this was the first time I had been out of the continental United States. And I was just amazed. It's a beautiful country. The places that Danny and Tina took me to were just absolutely fantastic. The scenery, the color, the culture is wonderful. 2015, I spent just over 3 weeks there, and it's the first time I had taken that much time off from work. 2015, went back to the Philippines, and I was gone for, I think, 37 days. Had a chance not only to go back to the Philippines, but to also go to Thailand. Spent some time in Thailand. And coming back, after I came back, I never thought about retiring until that last trip, 2016, that there is life outside of working. I started working junior year in high school, and I just worked. That's all I wanted to do, was just work. That's all I knew. Didn't know any better than just work. Now I realize that there is a life other than work, and I plan on taking full advantage of it. Can't quit cold turkey, so I figured I'd work till the end of 2017 full-time, and then maybe part-time 2018, and work when I want to work, not when they want me to work. My children, Robert, Michael, Sean, and Stacy. It's interesting, very interesting. Robert, Michael were born from first wife Carol, Sean and Stacy, second wife Denise. And it's interesting, the only common thread is me, but Robert and Sean have the same personality, and Michael and Stacy have the same personality, which is absolutely interesting, because Robert's two children, or three children, well, two of the three, Gregory and Alex, and surprisingly, when they were young, Gregory and Alex, they were just like Robert and Sean and Michael and Stacy. You know, I'm just totally amazed at that. And surprisingly, Robert and I have the same love, football and other things, and Michael and I have the same love of flying and other things. Sean and Stacy, it's interesting. Sean, it truly bothers me, the fact that I didn't grow up with or watch Robert and Michael grow up. That I truly regret. But spending time with, growing up with Sean, he was, I wouldn't say unusual, but he didn't mind working. When he lived at the house, we didn't charge him rent, Denise and I. We didn't charge him rent. We said as long as you had a job, you paid your bills, you could stay here for free. Sean kept his room spotless. Stacy, oh my gosh, her room looked like a hurricane went through. Uh, Sean was an excellent soccer player. He loved soccer and he liked basketball. And his favorite basketball player was Michael Jordan. Sean went to work for his uncles, Denise's brothers, doing construction work, and he is very good at that. He is, from what I understand, and the work that I've seen that he had done or completed, plus I had a chance to work with him on a couple of jobs, and he knows what he's doing, and he's very precise. He wants things done the correct way. He was okay in school. He was average, but he could do it. When he settled in, Sean could get good grades. Stacy, on the other hand, completely different. She was very wired, very hyper, very smart. Well, both of them are very smart. Sean knew how to get under Stacy's skin. He would push her button and she'd go ballistic, and he'd leave. he would, and she was still bouncing off the wall. But one thing about Stacy, after a half hour, everything was all over with. If she was angry with you, she'd cuss you out in a heartbeat, and that was it. Everything was over with. Stacy, when she finished school, thought she was going to go into nursing or something, but she ended up driving a tractor trailer. I could not believe driving a tractor trailer. I would come up from Virginia to visit her in Massachusetts, and she said, "Dad, you want to go with me for a ride?" I said, "Sure." So I'm thinking, because Dad's in the truck with her, she's going to be a little nervous. She never missed a beat. She backed up, hooked up the trailer like she was supposed to. She shifted like she was supposed to, did not grind any gears. She passed. She pulled out the pass with enough room, and when she pulled in, there was enough room. She docked the trailer, parked the trailer. She was just awesome. After, I think it was 3.5 years, she got smart and went to nursing school, and what she's doing very, very good at. Stacy was interesting. She could talk on the phone, watch TV, listen to the radio, and do homework at the same time, and get A's and B's. She's an interesting person. But all my children, super proud of. Without any help from me, with Robert and Michael, they turned out awesome. Same way with Sean and Stacy. They turned out awesome. I have a whole lot to be thankful for.
Okay.
I had stated earlier that my mother started drinking, and for a long time she drank very heavily, very heavily. When Denise and I were married, she would call the house 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, want to talk to Sean and Stacy and Denise. Totally wasted. And I would not let her do that. She would start talking, I would put the phone down. Half hour later, I'd pick up the phone, she's still talking. couple of times she called completely sober, and we would talk for a half hour. It was a pleasure to talk to her. I think that's one of the main reasons why I do not drink, never thought about drinking, because I saw what it did to her. And I did not want to end up like her. I think what changed, from what I understand, she was drunk one night, fell asleep while she had a cigarette in her hand, and she was burnt over part of her body, most of her body. I didn't realize this till later on. Tina would ask me, "Did you talk to your mother?" And I said, "No." She would ask maybe a month or two later, "Did you talk to your mother?" And I would say, "No." Tina would not push it, she would just ask and let it go. One time she asked, "Did you talk to your mother? Or have you talked to your mother?" And I said, "No, I have not." So to get her to stop asking, I called my mother. And I found out that because she had fell asleep while she had been drinking, she was burnt over most of her body. And from that point on, she had stopped drinking. And because of that, because of Tina, I was able to spend the last 2 years of her life together. Which was one of the best things that has ever happened to me since I met Tina. The other best was having her become reunited with my children. She is a very special person. And I'm very happy to know her, very happy that I met her. And when you meet her or see her, she is very unpretentious. What you see is what you get. And listening to her, she has brought joy to my life all over again. I always love her, always.